And now on to part 2 of season 1, episode 5 of Chris Watts. If you have not checked out the first part, please go check it out before continuing on, because there's going to be a bunch of spoilers here.
And really late that night, she said that they had the best talk yet. The next day, on August 10th, she left for a trip with Thrive in Arizona with her friends. Chris stayed home with the girls. Shannon posts a photo of her 15-week belly bump. And on August 11th, Chris has a babysitter come watch the girls so he can go with Nikki to a ball game for a date. So that still is not over. Chris leaves at 4:45 from his house. The babysitter's there, and he comes home around 10:30. During the Arizona trip, on the 12th, Shannon's friends say Shannon was very sad looking and mentioned Chris going to a ball game with friends. He said it was a group of guy friends. She said he told her that he had a beer and a salmon dinner, but when she checked the bill, it was $62. She was suspicious that he was with someone. That same day, Chris had agreed to take the girls to a birthday party and was texting Nikki the whole time he was there. Nikki texts a friend about Chris and her relationship that same day and how great of a dad he is with his kids, but she's insecure, saying, "I just feel like I will always be second place, like he's been there and done that. It's early though, we will see. He is very kind to me though." On August 13th, Shannon is seen entering the house at 2 a.m. on the doorbell camera. Her friend Nicole had dropped her off. They had just gotten back off the plane, I guess like a red-eye flight, and it was just about 2 o'clock in the morning when you can see her car pull up and Shannon walking up to the door on their doorbell camera. Her friend waits out in the driveway until Shannon makes it inside, and then she drives away. At 2:30 a.m., Shannon tries to order hair products, but her card is declined, so we know that she was awake at 2 a.m. doing that. Chris says he got up to get ready for work at 4 a.m. and Shannon woke up and they got into a heated conversation. He told her that he wanted a separation. He said she was crying and mascara was running down her face. He then says he went downstairs to get ready for work. At 4:25, Chris is seen on his neighbor's camera backing his truck to the garage and making a few trips out, including loading gas cans into his truck before pulling out for work sometime after 5. He is seen at a gas station buying food a little later that morning. At 7:45 a.m., Shannon's friend Nicole woke up and hadn't heard anything from her. Later that morning, she called and texted her with no response. She finally called Chris and told him that she hadn't heard from her, and he said, "Well, I haven't heard from her either. She was really upset. We got in an argument this morning about the separation." And Nicole was like, "Oh, I didn't know about a separation." He mentioned that Shannon was talking about taking the girls to a play date that day at another friend's house. Nicole thought it was odd because she was just with Shannon the previous day and Shannon never said anything about this play date. She knew that Shannon had a doctor's appointment though that morning at 9 a.m. So she called the doctor's office and they said Shannon never made it in. Finally, at 1:40, Nicole and her son are over at Shannon's house, knocking on the door, no answer. So she calls the police and Chris says he'll be over as soon as he can. The police officer comes up and Nicole says, "We had a business weekend out of town. I dropped her off this morning around 2 a.m. She wasn't feeling very well. My friend is 15 weeks pregnant and a diabetic. She had a doctor's appointment at 9 a.m. that she didn't show up for. I told her to let me know if she needed me to take her because she wasn't feeling very well." She then just says, we haven't been able to reach her. We've been here knocking on the door. Nicole knew the code to the front door, but the latch lock up at the top was fastened, so she couldn't get in. She did say that she opened it and was yelling, trying to see if Shannon would come to the door or wake up, or if one of the girls would come. Nicole says, "I thought they were just having issues, but her husband disclosed to me today that they are separating. Her car is in the garage. Her shoes she's been wearing every day are by the door. He said she was taking the girls to a play date, but why wouldn't she take her car?" The officer looks through the window and asks if the husband is on the way. She says, "Yes, I called him." The officer is worried she may have fainted or passed out somewhere, and so he asks her, "Can you please call Chris and get the garage code so we can get in and make sure that she is okay?" while she's doing that, he goes around the house looking in windows and looking for any type of activity going on inside the home. Chris says that the code on, like the little box code on the garage doesn't work and that he'll have to actually manually do it with the button in his truck once he gets there. So between 2 and 2:30, Chris finally pulls up. He like walks around his truck, opens his truck door, digs around. It's like, why are you not running? Why are you not running to the house to make sure your wife is okay? I mean, she's carrying your child, whether you like her or not. Then he shakes the police officer's hand, opens the garage, door, goes in, opens Shannon's car and like messes around in there, then goes inside. He's inside for like 1 to 2 minutes. I would say a couple minutes before he finally opens the door for them. And during this time, the police officer, Nicole, her son, are standing on the front porch. And the neighbor was over there at this point too. The neighbor had enough time to say that his camera on his house records motion. He says, I have Nicole's car pulling up and then backing out around 2 a.m. But after that, no cars are in and out until Chris leaves for work, and then there's no cars pulling in and out until Nicole again this afternoon, which they're just like, that's really odd. At this time, Nicole's on speakerphone with Shannon's mother when they go up to the door, and still Chris had not opened it. And so Nicole looks at the officer and says, can we go in the house? And the officer says, well, it's his house, it's up to him. And you can literally hear Shannon's mother on the phone say, I give you permission to get in that house. And at that time, Chris was already opening the door, which was probably really awkward for him. But it's like, go mom. They do a little search around the house. The officer starts kind of really sweating, like, oh my God, where is she? And he starts asking tons of questions. Who could she be with? And he's really realizing they're not here. Like, what is going on here? Chris starts saying things like, the girls' blankets they sleep with are gone. Then he finds Shannon's phone. And I mean, Nicole's like, oh my God, she doesn't have her phone? It's just so bizarre. Then he walks out with his pointer finger pointed out at them and Shannon's wedding ring is on it. He's like, yeah, I found this. His whole posture, everything about him is just, and he keeps swaying. Everything he does, he just sways back and forth. Nicole is pacing and panicking while Chris keeps telling the story of a play date and that he doesn't know where she's at. They go over and watch the footage on the neighbor's camera. Chris explains that he had a lot of stuff to load that morning, including gas cans, water jugs, and tools. The neighbor says this is him at 5:15 while Chris is looking down at his phone, swaying back and forth you literally just see Chris keep walking out to his truck because the camera only picks up motion. Right after 5:15 though, it goes off because that is when he leaves and his truck pulls out. And all of a sudden this commercial comes on of the camera cut off and it goes back to regular TV. And it's a commercial of a baby in the womb. And at this point, Chris looks up at the officer and says, oh yeah, she's also pregnant. It's just so strange. As Chris walks out, the officer says he's going to stay with the neighbor and get his details and then he'll be over because there was already officers pulling up at the Watts' home. So Chris walks out and then the neighbor looks at the officer and he says, he's not acting right. He never brings stuff in and out that many times in trips. He's like, I've never seen this on my footage before. He also says he backed really far up to the house, which is weird. Nicole was still in the house too, and Nathaniel, the neighbor, her and him both agreed that Chris's demeanor is completely off, something isn't right. Around this time, Chris is texting Nikki though, and she's like, I guess at this time she said that she was freaking out and asking him what was going on because it was starting to get on the news. I'm assuming you're kind of leaking out. More police came to search the house. In their bedroom, they noticed the sheets are wadded up in the floor. Chris told them that when he left, she was still in bed sleeping. Later that day, Chris and Nikki talked on the phone for almost an hour. A missing person report was done on Shannon and both girls, and it was spread everywhere. More calls are made between Chris and Nikki, and then on August 14th, the next day, TV stations come out to the house to interview Chris while K9 dogs are in the house searching, and during the whole interviews, you can hear them actually barking, which is crazy. He keeps saying really weird things while he sways back and forth I have no inclination where she or the kids are at. He said the last thing she said was that she was going to a friend's house and it was vague. Shannon, Belle, and Celeste, please, if you're out there, please come home, is what he says to the camera. During this time, the police also called Chris's work and asked where his location was the morning of the 13th. They told them the site and allowed them to go search it. Photos were taken at the location where a water tank and 2 oil tanks stood. One officer noticed something white in the nearby field and went to search for it. He noticed it to be a sheet, and the other officer came over to confirm it too. They had been told that there was a sheet that was thrown away in the trash at the Watts house and that there was a missing fitted sheet. They confirmed the pattern was like the same sheet. They also noticed a spot of disturbed soil, which means somebody had dug up a spot recently, and took photos of it as well. A broken metal rake and trash bags were also in this field, and then they left because they didn't get word on anything else. During the search for the canine dogs in the house, I did want to mention this. There's a video of it on YouTube, and it's so strange. I'll try to link it in my blog. If you're new, I do have a blog where every single Tuesday when an episode goes up, a blog goes up on that episode, and I try to link stuff there. So it's in the description of this, but there's a video of them searching, and when they get to Shanann's closet, it's so weird. You can literally hear a little kid giggle. And even the lady with the dog, she turns around and she looks at the officer and she's like, "Did you hear that?" It's so strange. Check it out if you haven't. Chris is brought in on the August 15th for a polygraph test that he obviously doesn't pass. 2 officers let him know he didn't pass and they needed to know what happened. They pretty much know that something happened out at that work site because of the sheet. It just all, you know, and like his demeanor, how he's acting, everything. He is just awful at lying. After a while of the same of interrogation rooms, they start using the victim tactic and just to try to get some answers. And a lot of people are mad about this, but this was literally how they nailed this guy. So she starts saying, "I want to believe that maybe Shanann was involved with it." And Chris says, "I wasn't involved with them." And she said, "Okay, Chris, tell me what happened." And then he confesses to them and then to his father that after the heated conversation about separating, so he ran upstairs to see Shanann on top of Cece. Then he said he looked over and seen Bella's lifeless body laying there. He was so mad he flew into a rage and he strangled Shanann for killing the girls. He tells them the rest that he loaded their bodies, took them to the oil site because he didn't know what to do. He put each one of the girls into these huge, tall oil tanks, which I will talk about more in a minute. It's so disturbing. Chris's co-worker said Chris requested that certain site of those oil tanks Friday before this happened. So like it was planned. On August 15th, when Nikki realizes what happened, she Googles, "Can cop trace text messages? How long does phone companies keep text messages?" She also looked up news for any updates on Shanann, and Chris is arrested. The autopsy revealed that Shanann was strangled. When her body started going through postmortem, so sadly, it delivered baby Nico in this shallow grave because that is what he did with her. He put the girls in an oil tank and then he buried Shanann in a very shallow grave. Bella and Cece were both smothered. There were signs that Bella fought back. Nikki made some more Google searches. She obviously loves Google, and she searched stuff about the mistress Amber Frey of Scott Peterson, which is another whole case that I should get onto at some point. But she also Googled Amber Frey's net worth and if people hated her. So at this point, she was literally like, "I'm screwed." Chris did confess about Nikki and said that he didn't want her to be involved with this. She had nothing to do with it. She was a wonderful person. And yes, she knew I was married, but that we were separating. He still says that he hasn't felt about anyone like he has with her in a very long time. Nikki says she had nothing to do with it and that she didn't even know Shanann was pregnant. She did because she Googled Shanann so long ago. She got on Shannann's Facebook so long ago. That was just a bull-faced lie. Everybody knew that Chris Watts was lying, though. And even his actual full confession of actually finally confessing to killing his own daughters, because Shanann did not kill her daughters, if you did not know. But he actually was sentenced before he even confessed to the whole thing. But first, I'm going to tell you what actually happened before I get to the sentencing, because I just want to wrap up the story. But his court date was actually done and he was sentenced before he even officially confessed, because everybody knew that he was lying and that he killed all 3 of them. That was just their way of getting something out of him to arrest him. So what actually happened was, when he got up for work, him and Shanann got into a fight about the separation. He got on top of her and strangled her. He wrapped her in a sheet and moved her to the garage. At this time, the girls were awake. He loaded his stuff and then put Shanann's body in the back floorboard of his truck. If you look closely, you can see the shadows of the girls following him behind the truck. He loaded them to the back seat, right above where their mom's dead body was at. And Bella, the 4-year-old, actually asked him what was wrong with her mommy. It's so awful. Chris said he blacked out. He doesn't remember anything else that he said until he got to the site, which was a 45-minute drive with his dead wife in the back and his 2 girls sitting up above her. No car seats, nothing, just like, I guess, just rolling around the back seat, like seeing their dead mom lay there. Once he got there, he dug a shallow grave and put Shanann in it while leaving the girls in the truck. He then came back to the truck and used the girls' blankets to smother the younger daughter, Cece, who couldn't really fight back because she was only 3. Bella cried and asked if he was going to do the same thing to her and that he did to Cece, and she fought back while he did. He then dropped their little bodies into these tall tanks that had only an 8-inch opening, literally meaning he had to shove them through this opening. He then went and got breakfast, confirmed to a coworker that he took care of the site, and went on with the workday until the officer at his house called him. Chris wanted a new life. He wanted a do-over, and he wanted to do that without his previous life. November 19th, Chris was sentenced. The judge said it was one of the most inhumane things he had witnessed. He got 5 life term without the possibility of parole. 3 counts, first-degree murder. 2 counts, first-degree murder of victims under 12 in position of trust. 1 count of first-degree unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. I did want to mention a couple of extra things, because this is where it gets really strange too about this, because this is pretty much over. He is, like I said, a POS and just an awful person. So Nikki Kessinger, the mistress, I'm calling her mistress. You know, if she was in a case where she really didn't know, then that's sad. But the fact that she knew he was married, you don't do that shit. Like, you just don't do it. But she first searched for Shanann Watts on September 1st, 2017, way before Chris and her was even talking to each other. So she had this in mind for a while. She also searched man I'm having an affair with, says he will leave his wife on July 23rd, 2018. So it was kind of like she was doubting it anyways. She should have just not messed with that. Like, come on. Until it's final, just stay away from it. Like, don't do that. Since I'm on the subject of her, it's really strange. You can look on YouTube also. There is a video of, like I said, the neighbor's camera, it comes on with motion. So it kind of records, like, I think it's like, what, like 15 seconds before there's a motion, and then like a few seconds after the motion or something like that. And so he comes back and forth loading his truck several times. But one of the clips is actually slowed down, and people are saying, and I can kind of see it too, but it's also like, is my eyes playing me? That type of ordeal. Because it kind of looks like somebody's walking with a ponytail. So people were trying to say, oh, she was in on this. She did this too. But it's really hard to say if that was really something. I don't really know if I can believe that as much. I do think the footage is really strange, but I do think it was just like a shadow or something while Chris walked by. I think it was just like a shadow because he was walking on the other side of his truck, so you couldn't really see his body. It's just like a head, but it does kind of look like it's somebody with a ponytail, so it's a little strange. Also that she was like seeing if cops could trace text messages and stuff like that around the same time. Like, it was very, very strange. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know. My Instagram is Caffeine Crime Podcast. Go comment on today's episode post what you guys think. Do you guys think she was involved? Do you guys think that was just it? We all know he's a POS, but Another weird thing that I did want to mention was after Chris was already arrested and their house was just sitting there, neighbors, so they looked outside and they seen a woman walking up through the yard, and she literally went into the house. Like, I kid you not. They called the cops. The cops came out and like searched the whole premises, and there was nothing in there. Like, they went inside and everything, and it's like dark in the house, and they have like their flashlights out. There's nobody there, and they're yelling, you know, so-and-so police department, and let yourself be known. I mean, they're yelling it. They literally thought somebody was in here because of how freaked out this other person was. Like, oh, here's some moron going into this house after this tragic thing happened there. There was nobody there. How strange is that? And tons of people now want to say that it was the spirit of Shanann. Oh, it gives me chills though. But those babies and her, rest in peace. Oh my God, it's just so awful. And my heart breaks for her mom and dad and family. It is so awful. And her hero and her earth, what people call her earth guardian angel, Nicole, who stood her ground with Chris, and she got the cops out there, because if it wasn't for her, who knows how long it would take for them to find Shanann and really break Chris Watts. But that is the story of mainly Shanann, Bella, Cece, and baby Nico that she was pregnant with. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot of footage with this case, but this case just always really stuck with me. It's been very close to my heart. I knew as soon as I started this podcast that this would be an episode. My heart just breaks for her family though, and for her, like, just losing her life so early to some POS who literally just wanted a do-over. There's a thing called a divorce, and a lot of people do it these days. Like, ugh. But I hope you guys enjoyed. You probably didn't, because it's so awful. But still, I hope you guys were entertained for episode 5. I will be back next week with episode 6. And if you guys have any suggestions on episodes, especially for next season, I'm still kind of thinking of the idea of serial killer season. I don't know. We'll see. But if you guys have any suggestions, let me know over at Caffeine Crime Podcast on Instagram. Like always, thank you guys for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you guys for listening. If you're listening on a podcast platform, and thank you so much. I'll see you guys in next week's episode.